So happy to see few faces here, but I'm so glad that most of you are able to join from home. It was so difficult to cross the street and to come to the church. You have taken a good decision, though I cannot see most of you, but God is watching all of us celebrating and keeping us safe. So stay warm, have more coffee. Dear friends, today on this third Sunday of Ordinary Time, and as we just celebrated the feast of our Heavenly Patron of the diocese and particularly of our parish, St. Francis de Sales, let us reflect on a very important theme. God calls us and God sends us. In other words, I invite you to reflect on the mission theme of our parish, making disciples and disciple makers. Now, first reading today from the prophet Isaiah, we heard these beautiful words. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Isaiah is speaking to people who were struggling, people who felt forgotten and lost, and God promises them light, not someday far away, but right where they are. God always begins His work in places that seem ordinary or broken or overlooked. That is exactly what we see in today's gospel. Jesus begins His ministry not in Jerusalem, not in the temple, but in Galilee, a simple place, we can say a mixed place, a place looked down upon by others. And whom does Jesus call? Not experts, not religious leaders, but fishermen, ordinary people, working people, people with families and daily worries. Jesus simply says, "Come after me, and I will make you fishers of men." Jesus does not give them a long explanation. We don't see, and Jesus does not promise any comfort. Jesus just invites them into a relationship and into a mission. And immediately they leave their nets and follow Jesus. Dear friends, those nets were their security, their income, their comfort. Following Jesus always means letting go of something, but it also means receiving something greater. This gospel today reminds us that discipleship is not just about learning, it is about following. And following Jesus always leads to mission. In the second reading, St. Paul speaks to the Corinthians about divisions. He reminds them that the church does not belong to Paul or Apollos or Peter. It belongs to Christ. This is very meaningful today, January 25th, the actual feast of the conversion of St. Paul, even though it is not celebrated liturgically this year because it falls on this Sunday. St. Paul's life teaches us something important. He says, Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel. Paul understood his mission clearly. Others baptized, he preached, different roles, different missions, but one purpose, to bring people to Christ. Yesterday, January 24th, was the feast of St. Francis de Sales, our patron saint and the patron saint of our diocese. St. Francis de Sales understood discipleship in a very beautiful way. He believed that everyone is called to holiness and that people are drawn to Christ not by force but by gentleness, patience, and love. He taught that our daily life lived with love becomes our mission. Let me explain it clearly from my personal experience of missionary life. I was ordained a priest on April 26, 2014 for the Missionary Society of Heralds of the Good News. Within 1 year after my ordination, I was sent to one of our missions in northeast India, to a remote village in the state of Arunachal Pradesh, a state bordering China. During my 11-12 years of formation, time flies with many celebrations with the friends and families. After ordinations, we are placed different places with the unknown people and culture. And I was totally far away from my family and friends. On April 26, 2015, the first anniversary of my ordination, I felt very sad because there was no celebration, no cake, no greetings, no gatherings. It was a Sunday like this. After Holy Mass with a few villagers, I went to another remote village to celebrate Mass. And during that Mass, I baptized 18 people, young and old. The catechist prepared and brought them to baptize. What is the most important here? I only baptized them. I was new there and don't know them very well. They were not brought to the faith by a priest or not by any non-missionaries. They were brought by those poor and uneducated villagers. Dear friends, it was their invitation. The invitation of those poor villagers, their simple faith and their way of life that attracted them. I don't take credit for baptizing them, for I just only administered the sacraments as a priest. But that gave me more joy and encouragement for my priestly journey from the very beginning. And that day taught me something I will never forget. The church grows not only through priests, but through faithful disciples living their faith. Dear friends, every one of us has a mission. Not the same mission, but the same purpose. Some preach, some teaches, some invites, some serve quietly, some witness through suffering, and some may be spending time quietly before the Lord in prayer. But all of us are called to continue the work of Jesus. This is the mission of our St. Francis de Sales parish, to be disciples and disciple makers. Jesus is still walking along the shores of our lives today, here in Newark, Ohio, saying, "Come after me." In our families, in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods, even on days like these, though weather is too bad and difficult roads, God's light continues to shine through faithful hearts. As we celebrated the feast of our heavenly patron, St. Francis de Sales, may he inspire us to live our faith gently. May St. Paul remind us to stay focused on Christ alone, and may the Lord give us the courage to follow him and help others to do the same. Amen.